Okay, we're going to talk about the Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. I think we're going to get through all of that tonight. I got a bunch of slides, so if you get behind, it'll be up on it is up on the website. I think this is classes 9. I have to put this one up. I added some things into it to make it more complete. So we're talking about the Chronicles. We're going from the Kings and the Chronicles, going 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. If you're reading through those, you know that covers a lot of the same territory. And it's just told from two different perspectives. The Bible is not afraid to repeat itself. That's a good thing. But it is, that's what we have: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have 4 Gospels. We have 4 different people telling the same story about Jesus' life and from different perspectives and with different emphasis. 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles are pretty much the same thing. And so Samuel and Kings cover material, and then Chronicles covers the material. The focus in Chronicles is David and Judah, King David and the tribe of Judah and the southern kingdom, which is after Solomon dies. There is a split in the kingdoms. There's a split in Israel. There's a northern kingdom, which came to be known as Samaria. Ephraim in your Bibles, you'll read it referred to as Samaria. That became the capital city. It was like the highest point in the middle of that part of Israel, so it became the capital city, the throne city, so to speak. Families kept fighting for that. A couple weeks ago we talked about that. And so Samaria, Ephraim, Israel, and then the southern kingdom primarily became known as Judah, which it included the tribe of Judah, all the Levites, which moved from the other Levitical cities. They all moved to Jerusalem, and the tribe of Benjamin. And then the other 10 tribes became their own nation, this northern nation. So when you read in the Bible, you'll see them referring to Ephraim, and that was like the largest part of the northern kingdom. So Chronicles just deals with, though, David, primarily King David and the kingdom of Judah, and the things that are happening around Jerusalem, in Jerusalem and around Jerusalem. So the political history of Israel is covered in Kings, Samuel and Kings. Chronicles really focuses on the religious history. Different viewpoints, different kinds of emphasis are in the Chronicles. So 3 primary teachings that we'll notice from Chronicles. 1, God's faithfulness. God's faithfulness in spite of leaders who are not faithful to him. And so he keeps his promise to his people. Like we have Big Day tomorrow here in America. And some of you might be a little disappointed on Wednesday, about who is in charge at that point. And God is faithful. God is faithful to his people. Some people probably didn't get to elect a king in Israel. The king was chosen by the family. The family of David was the throne family, but God is still faithful to his people. We also see the Word of God and its power to transform people, to keep people in times of difficulty. And then, because Chronicles is told by the priests, the Chronicles is written by the priests who served in the temple, we get an idea of the central concept of worship and why it is necessary in the people for the people of God to have a place of worship and a practice of worship. So Chronicles tells us this. It gives us a lot of lists. It gives us a lot of names. It's very specific about who was a doorkeeper and who was a singer and who was a servant in another way in the temple, because all of those people matter. All those families matter. So you get the Bible is like a very specific book about naming people. And in particular, Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, gives you a lot of names and sets in motion this sets in motion something that continues and continues and continues into the New Testament, because Zacharias, that we read about in Luke, is a part of this coursing of servants. servants dividing in, the division of the groups of people that would serve in the temple. This course would go on, this progression would go on all the way into the New Testament, all the way, I believe, until 70, the year 70. In the year 70, that's when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and burned the temple and tore open, what was his name? There was a general, I can't remember what his name is, the Roman general tore open the Holy of Holies and found nothing there. So these things are defined here in Chronicles for us. Okay, so Christ in these books, there is an explicit, detailed rendering of the Davidic line of the kings. So you get all of the fathers' progression, from David all the way down to the point, to the very end of the kingdom. Okay, so they mark out David's line, where he came from, and then what came after him all the way. And now the thing to remember is that Israel is, during the writings of this, Israel is not a kingdom at this point. Israel is not a kingdom. They have been taken captive. So Chronicles is written by the priests after they return, after the captivities. They have no king. They are waiting for the next king. They are still in waiting for their next king. That is the purpose of their looking for the Messiah. So the temple points to Christ here, and in Matthew 12:6, there's a great Jesus says something here, something important to the Pharisees and to all those listening to him. It says, "Yet I say to you in this place, there is one greater than the temple." There is one greater than the temple. So the temple points to Christ, but Christ is greater than the temple. Greater than the temple. And the fulfillment of all of that happens at the end of the Bible, Revelation 21, where it talks about how eternity will be. It says, but I saw no temple. John sees everything in Revelation, everything that happens after the Great Tribulation, but I saw no temple, comma, means you pause there for a sense. If you take my English class, you understand that. The first part of, but I saw no temple, slight pause, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. So, God established in Exodus the portable worship center, the tabernacle that moved with them, the tent. And then under the reign of Solomon, God established the permanent tabernacle, the permanent temple, the large structure that was built there. And it was destroyed by the Babylonians, and then it was rebuilt again, and then it was destroyed again, and then it was rebuilt by Herod. So and then it was destroyed finally. So we're waiting for another kind of temple to come. That kind of temple will come in the tribulation. There will be a certain kind of temple during the tribulation, but then at the end of Ezekiel, we see the lasting permanent temple. And then here we see even that lasting temple that will be established, eventually that also will be something that is not necessary, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb will be the temple. The presence of God will not need a place to be. Everyone will worship, as Jesus told the woman at the well in John chapter 4. Everyone will worship in spirit and in truth. So that's where we're going. And so Chronicles does give us an idea of like a sense of order that God has for his place of worship, his worship center. And God feeds this information through the mind and heart of David. And it does a lot for the temple setup, and then it does a lot for the nation as a whole. And so we'll go. Okay, so the first 10 chapters of this, there's a lot of names, a lot of this one came from that one came from this one, begat. We get that, and the first 10 chapters gives us a detailed family record that is related to David. And then the next 10 chapters, 11 to 22, David's desire for the temple and his construction and his preparations for it. And then in the last part of 1 Chronicles, David outlines how the temple should operate. It's important to him. It's important that the modes of operation be set and settled so that there's no confusion. And that's why all of the genealogies are here. The genealogies, some were chosen. You'll read through this in chapter 9. You'll see chosen as the gatekeepers were 212. And the trusted heart, and verse 26 of chapter 9 in 1 Chronicles, for in this trusted office were 4 gatekeepers, and they had charge over the chambers and the treasuries of the house of God. So all of these things, all of these people were put into their places. So I'm sorry. Okay, so now how did David prepare for the temple? Well, first, finally, the Jebusites were driven from the city of Jerusalem. So the city of Jerusalem was a pocket in Israel, in the nation of Israel, that hadn't been fully conquered until David came along. And the Jebusites mocked David. This is a guy who killed Goliath. The Jebusites said, "You're not coming in here." And David said, "I believe I am." And he did, and he drove those people out, and they became slaves to the city. So David took control of the city, and then he organized a return of the Ark of God that had been captured by the Philistines and then brought back into Israel, but was now at a house. And that house was receiving much blessing, the house of Obed-Edom. He and his family were enjoying having the Ark around. Uzzah was a member of that family. When they started to bring the Ark, they did it the wrong way the first time. They put it on a cart, brought it, it shook, the cart shook, Uzzah touched it. Uzzah had this Ark around him for a long time. He had never thought about steadying it. He steadied it, and God struck him dead. So the next time, David realized what he was supposed to do. In 1 Kings, we don't get the explanation of what the problem was. In Chronicles, we get the explanation. David understood that only Levites were to bear the ark, and they were to bear the ark on their shoulders. It was to be carried on the shoulders. 4 men carrying it on their shoulders, staves through the 4. The ark has a certain design, a certain weight to it, had to be carried by these Levites. And after he brought the ark into the city, then David began to receive the plans, the blueprints from God about how the temple should be. And Solomon followed all the details in particular and made the temple an amazing piece of religious work. It had giant pillars in front of it, bronze, giant golden statues inside. All of that was there. It was put in the heart of David, the design for this. So also he conquered certain lands and levied tribute. The Israelites did not invade and they did not invade and annex territory, but they did control the territory what's now known as Lebanon. And that area up there, and then also other areas around Moab, Ammon, these places, the Philistines, they were under the control of David's throne. And so those lands provided building materials, wood, and also all of the, David prescribed all the ways that the things should be built, and then Solomon organized the way that the stones would be fastened and quarried. So he purchased the temple site. Why did he purchase the temple site? This is a test. Why did David have to purchase the temple site? End of 2 Kings. End of 2 Samuel. Sorry. Yeah, something was happening. David sinned in numbering the nation, trying to find out how big his army was. He found out he had 1.5 million man army. Why was God, pride is like a big thing. It's the monster sin. And God, really, it would have been, what, we talked about what Israel fought on, right? Donkeys, right? They fought on, horses really didn't come into Israel's picture until Solomon, when they had all of the prosperity and all the peace. Then horses became a common sight in Israel. Before that, it was donkeys, mules. That's what they rode into battle on, and they had 1 million men on all these mules, Probably could look a little funny, all these fighting men coming, to meet all these giant, but that's exactly the presentation that God was asking. Just like David, just picture David running at the giant with his bag and his sling, 16, 17-year-old boy taking on a 9.5-foot man, and the same thing, that the armies of Israel were to come in low, And if you watch American football, you understand the best way to take anyone down is to go low. Grab them by the ankles and put them on the ground. Ravens. They could do that a little bit better. Okay, anyway. So he purchased the temple site because of his sin, his pride in numbering the army. And when he purchased this threshing floor, and that threshing floor is now the Dome of the Rock. That is where the Dome of the Rock is right now in Jerusalem. That threshing floor is the piece of territory that David purchased, and that is where where Solomon's temple was built there, and the following temple was built there, and then Herod's temple was built there. The Wailing Wall that the people of Israel now pray at, the rabbis, is a part of Herod's temple. I think, let's see, it is 27 times Jerusalem has been flattened. Do you know that? 27 times there has been 27 sieges and destructions of Jerusalem. So like Solomon's temple is probably down below a couple of levels of destruction. So like I'm just saying that when you go to Jerusalem, you are walking where Jesus walked, but you might not be walking on the stones that Jesus walked on, because Jerusalem was flattened several times. Now, if you get out into Galilee, of course, you find a lot of places where Jesus walked, and there was nothing to flatten there, never has been. But in Jerusalem itself, they flattened Jerusalem 27 times. It's going to be destroyed. God does things in cycles of 7. There's going to be one more flattening. So it's it's going to come, during the Great Tribulation and that kind of thing. Okay. So and then at the final thing that David did was he appointed and anointed and charged Solomon to be the leader and the king. Okay, so the order of the temple. This is the order of the temple. These are the families. Okay, the Levites, they had a special role. They were all given, commissioned for the menial duties, carrying the water, the butchering of the sacrifices, the boiling of that. All of that, was a lot of small things. It's not like the worship center was a place of sacrifice and offering and, of course, of hearing the word of God. But there was a lot of messy details that went on. Draining the blood out of the animals, disposing of the pieces that weren't, that didn't burn up, the taking of the ashes and the bits of bone. All of that happened, and the Levites were assigned these menial duties. Among the Levites were the priests. They were given the ministerial functions. Singers were appointed for the musical duties to sing the praises, and then the porters were assigned material tasks and gatekeeping. So this is the order that David established in the temple, and it's all recorded here. And Chronicles is the priests getting this all down on paper so that everyone understands exactly the way that the temple is supposed to operate. They are anticipating that the Messiah will come, and then all of this thing will be reactivated. So, how they will determine who are Levites and who are priests and everything from, the way that Israel has been, spread out through history throughout the whole world is something that God will do. But we know that in Revelation that God does call 12,000 missionaries from every tribe of Israel. So there are obviously God is preserving the nation in some way, the tribes. Now, he does also the order for the nation. So also all contained in this book of Chronicles, is David commissioning soldiers for their military actions, and then the stewards that were set up to serve the municipal deeds. Okay? David even had counselors. Why? Because people are mental. And so mental issues in the kingdom. God gave David a plan to deal with the mental health issues of the people of his kingdom. There were going to be these kind of things. So Soldiers were for your protection. Stewards were to serve you and to help you. And then the counselors were there to provide counsel. And then the princes above this, you had rulers, principals. And what did the people do? They gave. Call it what you want. Offerings, taxes, whatever you want. The people were to give for the building of God's house. And David outlined all this during his reign, and it's all recorded here by the priests in Chronicles here. So we have the order of the temple is first established, and that's really the thing that God has always sort of, when we see Israel go back, the first thing that they do is rebuild the temple, get the place of worship set, and they start with the holiest place. They start with the place where the ark is supposed to go, and then they work their way out. And this has always been the way that the worship centers of Israel have been set up. It's first the ark is constructed, it is set in its place, and then it is surrounded by its holy place. And then once that is settled, the rest of the structure is erected. And that's what happens in Solomon's temple, and that's what happens in the latter temples too. The first thing they do is establish the place where the holy place will be. So that's the order of the temple established first, and then the order of the nation. And we'll see that happen later on. Ezra will come and help in the building of the temple with Haggai and Zechariah. These guys will lead the building of the temple when Israel returns from its captivity. We'll see later on. And then later, Nehemiah will come along and help rebuild the city and help rebuild the walls of the city and set the municipal operation back in order. But first, the spiritual operation must be in order, and then the municipal operation can be in order. Okay? This is a good thing. This is a nice political sounding kind of class on the night before the elections. So we have an election tomorrow if you're watching online. There's an election tomorrow in America for president, and the whole House of Representatives and a third of the Senate tomorrow, and other things are happening. But so first, the spiritual element is settled, and then the municipal element is settled. Okay? All right, Kings and Chronicles. What's the difference? There are some differences. The kings spoke the word. The prophets and kings spoke the word to the kings and magnified the justice of God. But the priests, through Chronicles, spoke the word and focused on mercy. Mercy rejoices against murmuring. Mercy rejoices against judgment. That's the thing. Mercy rejoices against judgment. Mercy rejoices because it receives all the judgment. Okay? The mercy of God is expressed now because all the judgment has been received in the person of Christ. All judgment upon the sin of the world has been received and placed upon the body. He who knew no sin was made sin for us. And now so that we might be the righteousness of God. So he who knew no sin. So the temple view, and because it's based on after sacrifice ideas, like the first thing you come through the gate of the temple, and the first thing you see is the brazen altar where the sacrifice is. And you don't go in to enjoy the presence of God. The priests did not go in to enjoy the presence of God or enjoy that until the sacrifices were made. The sacrifices came first there at the brazen altar. So this is the thing. The temple view is always the after the offering view. So we are in the New Testament, we are the after the offering view of things. And so Jesus Christ was the once for all sacrifice for our sins. And so the sacrifice, the view of the priests is always built on the finished work of Christ. They were looking toward it, and we look back at it. So the priests were looking toward this once sacrifice, this final sacrifice, and now we look back at it. So that's why the views here. So and it shows up in a number of things. All right. So now we get into 2 Chronicles and the temple, and we'll see as we read through this, we get the whole cycle of kings, but not the northern kingdom kings. They're not mentioned here. Okay? We don't get an idea of, we don't see Elijah or Elisha mentioned. Elijah and Elisha, they witnessed to the northern kingdom, to Samaria, to this group of 10 tribes that started their own nation and did not have Jerusalem as its capital. The focus of the 2 books, is the temple and the throne and the city of Jerusalem and what goes on out from there. So we don't get any word except unless there's some sort of battle going on with one of the kings of Judah with one of the kings of Israel. And there was some of that going on. Brothers fighting against brothers. All right? But the thing is that the kings, you'll notice that as you go through reading about the kings, there's always a mention of what that king's relationship to the temple and its upkeep and its standing or status in his life and in the nation's life. So we see Rehoboam was the son of Solomon. He was the first king of Judah only, and while Jeroboam took 10 tribes, started a new nation, a separate nation. So Rehoboam, when he was in trouble, was about to lose his kingdom. He wound up taking refuge in the temple. So we talked about Solomon, the building of the temple, and Solomon. So the first few chapters of 2 Chronicles deals with Solomon himself and building of the temple. We don't have to rehearse that. It's pretty much the same thing. We get the same exact prayer recorded again for us. And then there's a quick picture of the Queen of Sheba coming and talking about how great the temple was and how great the wisdom of Solomon was and how great the God of Israel was. So we get that world testimony, that outside testimony from this queen who travels with a large gift for Solomon and the people of Israel. And she talks about, it takes her breath away, just what God has done here. But then right after that, everything else is really downhill. The first part of chapter 9 talks about the Queen of Sheba, and then after that, everything falls apart. But it's very quick. We don't have a long, drawn-out explanation of Solomon's troubles. We just get the end of chapter 9, and Solomon dies, and Rehoboam reigns in his place. So Rehoboam took refuge in chapter 10. He takes refuge in the temple, and that's where he was. He was a man who took refuge in there. And then Abijam, his son, after that, he withstood a rebellion against the temple. People were trying to bring in other things like we see what's going on in Israel. They seem to be doing okay. Let's bring something else in here. And Abijam stood against that rebellion against the temple. Now the temple started to fall into disrepair. The Levites, they weren't being served the right way. They weren't being supported in the way that they were supposed to. And so we have the first king, one of the first decent kings. He sponsored a restoration of the temple. So he restored the temple. He's a man who made a splendid beginning, but he later had a tragic ending. But early in his reign, he relied on the Lord, believed God, and then also, established the temple and started to renew it. But towards the end of his life, he was diseased in his feet. He became diseased in his feet and had a bad walk with God because he made a treaty with a foreign power rather than resting on God, sort of like numbering the troops like David did. Asa didn't do that. He made a foreign alliance in chapter 16. He made a foreign alliance and sought protection from a Syrian king, and he became angry with the prophets, didn't listen to God. And then towards the end, he became diseased in his feet, it says in verse 12. And his malady was severe, yet in his disease he did not seek the Lord. And so we see here's a king that early started something, but later he wasn't so faithful. Jehoshaphat was the next one. Jehoshaphat promoted the worship of God and the teaching of the word. It says that he recognized the problem of the nation, and he sent out teachers throughout all of the nation to tell people the word of God. But him also, he found the wrong woman in his life. He found the wrong woman in his life and walked in the counsel of the ungodly, married a young woman from a foreign land, and that changed his, he allied himself with Ahab. And after years, he went down to visit Ahab. So, he allied himself with the wrong people in his marriage. And so even though he, promoted the worship at the temple and also promoted the word of God, he did not, end well. He did not, he started out well, but then towards the end of his life. But there's many victories, a couple of great victories that are ascribed to him here. And, he had a long and fruitful reign in some ways. So, and then we see that Jehoram, Ahaziah, and Athaliah. Athaliah is the only queen that Israel ever had. She killed 69 sons, and only one survived, and she killed all of them, and she managed to be 7 years in power, but they all suffered retribution. She was actually taken captive in the temple. So these three leaders suffered because of their lack of a relationship with God and because of their lack of honor for the place of worship, the lack of promotion of worship in the temple. But God preserved a person, God preserved a man on the throne. And when Athaliah killed all the sons, he reserved one. He reserved one for himself, and that was Joash. Joash was the boy who became king at 7. Isn't that great? 7. We're not electing someone tomorrow who's going to be 7 years old. I think President Obama is 50. I think he just turned 50. I think he's young. Yeah, he is. He's the first president younger than I am. He's 50, and I think Governor Romney is 65, I think, but not 7 years old. Not 7 years old. But Joash was 7 years old, and he had a priest named Jehoiada, who was his counselor. So Joash restored, he repaired the temple, and as long as Jehoiada was there, sort of his conscience and his guide as a spiritual man, the priest in the temple, Joash's relationship was well with God, and the nation prospered and went through a period of peace and victory. And so they started to, they noticed, you know how it is. How many own houses here? Not many, sorry. Okay, so I just know that, I've owned a house. The bank still owns it, I should say. I'm still paying for a house that I supposedly own all these 20 years later, and I just had to put a roof on this in the spring. I'm so happy I did, because if I hadn't put a roof on, probably I would have been bailing water last Monday, Tuesday, with all the rain that happened. But, there's upkeep. There's upkeep in that. And so the temple was not, it was supposed to be the focus of Israel's life. This was supposed to be the feasts, the 3 feasts of the year. Solomon instituted them. The daily sacrifices, all these things are supposed to be going on. So there should have been offerings and plenty of food coming in for the priests and the Levites serving there. All of that should have been coming in. The repairs should have been, the stones should have been kept plastered. The wood should have been in good repair. All of the metals should have been kept from corrosion and all that. Everything should have been fine there. David set in order all of these people that were supposed to take care of it. But, the kings generally were more interested in keeping the people happy, bread, food, peace, that kind of thing. And so the temple fell out of repair sometimes. And then Joash restored and repaired this temple. But after this godly priest was buried, Joash became a legend in his own mind, and eventually even had the son of his advisor killed. The son of his advisor was executed for challenging the king. So, and what happened was that when he died, they did not bury Joash in the tombs of the king. He died in battle. And some people conspired against him, and the enemy conspired against him, and God executed the judgment on Joash. So he started well, and he had a good relationship, but then after this man died, Amaziah, that was kind of Amaziah is a strange story. He became king. He won an amazing battle, defeating a huge army, and then found an idol and took that idol back and told the priests to build an altar to that idol in the temple territory, in the temple compound. So Amaziah's relationship to the temple was not a good one. Uzziah, or Azariah, he's got two names. He was a good and strong king, but this is the man that he decided that he was going to present an offering of incense. He came in and he recognized the temple, he recognized its place in Israel, but he decided that as the king, he should also be able to participate in what's going on in the temple. So he came in to offer an offering of incense, and the priests there said, "This is not your place. This is the holy place. Your place is in the municipality. This is the spirituality." And what happened? The moment that he came in to offer, leprosy broke out on his head. And within a few moments, he was a total leprous being. And it says that he lived in a separate house, or a several house, it says, I think in King James. But he lived in a separate house the rest of his days. And his son Jotham managed the affairs of Israel and really respected the temple and the priests. Now, if you see your dad come in and do something stupid like that and break out in leprosy, that'll give you a measure of respect, won't it? Maybe, I don't know, maybe not. But that's Jotham. It just says that Jotham respected the temple. It's like, that is a nice place. God is there, and I think we'll just be careful. We'll be careful because Uzziah. And this is the thing. This was it happened with Saul. Saul stepped into places he wasn't supposed to step into, making an offering, and God took the kingdom from him. Now you see the next king, Ahaz. He closed the temple, he raided it, and he left it in disrepair. So Ahaz was, a wicked king in Israel, in Judah, but he was, he cut pieces of the temple, cut pieces of the golden temple, and used it to pay for some help in some of the battles that he was in. So that happened. So he raided the temple and used it as sort of his own bank with all of the gold and silver that was there. And he erected altars in every corner of Jerusalem and burning incense to other gods. This happens in chapter 28. All right, now here we come to a couple of kings towards the end of Israel's independence. Okay, Israel's independence is going to end here. Their independence is going to end at the close of Chronicles. Hezekiah comes to power during the time of, Hezekiah comes to power during the time of the preaching ministry, the prophet ministry of Isaiah. And Hezekiah reopens the temple, restores the temple. Hezekiah was a masterful person. A masterful person. He created a way to get water into Jerusalem so that all the people in the city would have water. If he was the mayor of New York, he'd probably have all the lights on now already. That's the kind of king he was. He was very engineering-minded, did a lot of things, setting up the gate system, all kinds of things that he did. He made it clean again. He opened the temple. He cleansed it. And he instituted the services again. It was restored, the Passover. The Passover, which seems to us like really, it would be like us as believers just neglecting Easter. It happens at the same time, right? Do we neglect Easter as believers? And there are people here with me. I'm just talking to them. But we do not neglect Easter. Just think about this. We do not neglect. In my house, we give gifts at Easter. The parents do. We have given gifts at Easter. Like we're saying, man, if Santa Claus comes, then, it's like, and the Easter Bunny doesn't give the gifts at Easter in our house. It's like we give something, spiritually oriented. Although one year they all got magic bullets. All my kids got magic bullet, They were older, so they got magic bullets. And we'd given them Bibles and stuff already, that kind of thing. But we would give them a Bible and these kind of things. But during the courses of the years, the Passover had fallen out. It's like it's just, what's the holiday? What's going on? And the Passover was neglected. Now the nation of Israel and Jews around the world, they don't neglect the Passover at all. It's a very traditional kind of thing. They can't think of neglecting it. It ties them together in terms of family and identity. But during these days in Jerusalem, even the Passover had become like not a celebration, not a feast celebrated. And so Hezekiah had a great reign. And during his reign, what happened was the empire of Assyria came into power and took the whole northern kingdom captive, and then set its sights on coming in and taking Jerusalem also. So during Hezekiah's reign is one of the sieges of Jerusalem. 185,000 soldiers were killed by an angel in one day. You've heard that story. Like an angel, Pastor Shabelli likes to tell, like an angel on his lunch break went down and killed 185,000 soldiers. But that really happened. Hezekiah was his dedication to the temple, and his dedication to the presence of God resulted in a long and healthy reign. And he prayed for extra years, and God gave him 15 years, extra years. But like David at the end of his reign, he also became proud and showed everyone. The Babylonians sent a delegation, and he showed everyone all the riches of Israel. And the Babylonians knew exactly what to carry away when they came and took over Israel a few years later. Now we have these two other people, Manasseh and Ammon. Now I don't know if you know about Manasseh. You know about Manasseh, right? 55 years. Probably the worst dictator in history. One of the worst dictators in history. It says he shed much innocent blood. And when you hear this term, you have to understand, we think of shedding innocent blood. We talk about, in our culture, we talk about the scourge of abortion and how innocent babies are killed. And we think like this is a new thing. Like abortion is new in this sense, in that they take the baby out of the womb before it is birthed. But the idea of allowing children to die just for the sake of letting them die because it's too inconvenient for you to raise that child is not a new thing. This happened. When you read this, it said he shed much innocent blood. What it meant is that he had brought so much idolatry into the nation of Judah, into Jerusalem, that there was so much promiscuity going on that women would give birth to babies and the babies would be left to die. Usually the girls. The boys, they could be raised up to be soldiers, but girl babies, if they were fortunate, they were picked up by the temple prostitutes and trained to be temple prostitutes. But if they were unfortunate, they were left out to die. So this is like when he shed much innocent blood. How did he shed much innocent blood? The practices of the people turned to idolatry. They became sinful, promiscuous, fornicators. And that's really, when you're talking about, and this happened in the Roman era, this also happened in the Roman era during Jesus' day and Paul's ministry. Girl babies were left to die or left for the animals out on the hills around Rome and throughout the Roman. And during the 1700s, the early 1700s, before the ministry of John Wesley, a lot of 75% of the children under 5 years old died. And a lot of them were just left out to die because the consequence of sin. They didn't want to raise the child. They wanted to have sex without responsibility, without this, sexual freedom. And this was part of the freedom, is like, we can get rid of this child. And so it says that Manasseh shed much innocent blood, and this is why it says that. But there is an interesting thing that happens here. We don't read it in Kings. The prophets don't tell you about Manasseh's conversion later in his life. It's like, if you ever doubted the grace of God, then read this chapter, read this part about Manasseh. Let's see, here it is. It says, verse 9, Manasseh seduced Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to do more evil than the nations whom the Lord had destroyed before Israel. And the Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they would not listen. Therefore the Lord brought upon them the captains of the army of the king of Assyria, and took Manasseh with hooks and bound him with bronze fetters. So Manasseh was bound in chains and took to Babylon. Now it says, chapter 33, verse 12, this is Chronicles. This isn't mentioned in Kings, but in Chronicles. Now when he was in his affliction, he implored the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers and prayed to him, verse 13. And he God received his entreaty, heard his supplications, and brought him back to Jerusalem into his kingdom. And then Manasseh knew that the Lord was God. So you can have 50 years of wildness and foolishness, and he became a believer in God at the end. That's foreign idols brought into the temple. Josiah was the last spiritual king, and he heard a word from the Lord, and the temple was like a giant Home Depot. Just think about that. Just think of the temple was just a large place of lumber and material, and they didn't even know that the Bible was in there. But when they were cleaning it out, they found the book of the law, read it. Josiah tore his clothes, and during this time, there was a revival, and during this time, Daniel and Jeremiah were born. So you have, and probably several other prophets too, but Daniel and Jeremiah in particular, during this time of Josiah's rule, they recognized, they learned, they were raised, and then when the real trouble came after Josiah died, these kings, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, witnessed the final ravaging of the temple, and Zedekiah, when the Babylonians came to finally destroy Israel, one of his final sights was he saw the temple being burned. That was one thing he saw. Then they killed all of his sons before him, and then they poked his eyes out. So the last thing Zedekiah saw, and this man lived, as we read through Jeremiah in the spring and Lamentations, you'll learn a lot about Zedekiah and how much he knew was coming. Jeremiah kept telling him, the Babylonians are coming, you can't stop it, the sins of the people have come before God, you should surrender, you should surrender, you should surrender. And of course Israel, the king of Israel said, no, I'm a king. But it wound up, he was defeated. All right, so last thing, we'll go over this before we take our break. The prophet's view and the priest's view. So in 1 Samuel 12, the prophet refers to Isaac's son as Jacob. In Chronicles, Jacob's name isn't mentioned. It's always Israel, prince with God. In 1 Samuel 31, the Philistines killed Saul, it says. It says the Philistines killed Saul. In 1 Chronicles 10, there's no mention of Philistines. It says God killed Saul, King Saul. In 2 Samuel 6, we have one chapter on David's recovery of the ark. But in 1 Chronicles, we have 3 full chapters on that, 13, 15, and 16, on how the ark was brought back to Jerusalem. In 2 Samuel 7, David is told he cannot build the temple. In 1 Chronicles 16, we get the reason. You shed much blood. You have not rested. You have been a man of war all your life. It's not right for you. The man of peace must build the temple. And David understands that. The next one, 2 Samuel 11 and 12, we get the whole sordid detail about David's sin with Bathsheba. But in Chronicles, it's not mentioned. That story is not mentioned in Chronicles. God forgives and forgets. David sinned in numbering the people, it said. It said David sinned. But in Chronicles, there's the spiritual element. It says that Satan prompted David to number the people. The devil made David do it. You know? It's like, let's get to understand, David didn't really want to number the people. The devil made David do it. In 1 Kings 11, we get Solomon's sin. But in 2 Chronicles 9, there's no reference to Solomon's sins. And, it just says, it doesn't say anything about how his heart was taken over by his wives and directed to other people. So that's the way Chronicles accounts for things, and that's the way the kings account for things. Now, when we come back, we'll talk about what happened and where Israel went in their captivities. You can see there, and we'll talk about this map in a few minutes, okay? So take 10 minutes and come back, and we'll talk about captivity